today's program, which is the India Agribusiness Leadership Program brought to you by ILFI, the Infrastructure, Industry and Logistics Federation of India, with support of the Ministry of Food Processing Industries. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and join me in welcoming our chief guest for today's program, the Honorable Secretary, Department of Agriculture, Cooperation and Farmers Welfare, Government of India, Shri Siraj Hussain, who is right here with us. And it's an honor also to be joined here by Dr. J.B. Penn, the Chief Economist, John Deary, and former Undersecretary, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, our guest of honor. Of course, also joining us today, we have Mrs. Sanjeev Chopra, an IAS officer, also formerly Joint Secretary and Mission Director, Horticulture, Ministry of Agriculture and Farmers Welfare, Government of India, and of course, Mr. P.K. Tripathi, the Chairman, Northern Region, ILFI, and our very own Dr. Mahesh Reddy, the Director General, ILFI, once again. So a very distinguished set of speakers this evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the inaugural ceremony of our 3-day program of the India Agribusiness Leadership Program. And at the outset, we'd like to welcome the Honorable Secretary and Dr. Penn. So if I may request first Dr. Mahesh Reddy to kindly extend a floral welcome to the Honorable Secretary, Dr. Hussain. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us this evening. And if I may request Mr. Sanjeev Chopra to kindly extend a floral welcome to Dr. Penn for being here. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the India Agribusiness Leadership Program is an initiative conceptualized by the Agribusiness and Food Processing Council of the ILFI, and it is a 3-day workshop for a limited number of CEOs and senior management personnel of the agribusiness companies in India. The workshop will provide a global perspective on agriculture, commodity prices, and new technologies in agriculture. And IALP is carefully designed in such a way that current trends and challenges in all subsectors of agriculture are discussed it has the right mix of global aspects as well as India-specific agriculture issues. And over the next 3 days, we have some very interesting um, sessions, discussions, and we are expecting some expert speakers starting from tomorrow. I would want to name a few. We'll be having Dr. Ashok Gulati, the Infosys Chair Professor with ICR, IER. We are also going to have an address by His Excellency Mr. Daniel Carmen, the Honorable Ambassador of Israel to India. We are expecting Dr. Raghav Chandra, the Honorable Chairman, NHAI, and of course, we'll also be having His Excellency Mr. Alphonsus Stolling, the Ambassador of Netherlands in India, and Dr. Ramesh Chand from the Niti Aayog. And we also like to thank all of our sponsors, the Star Agri Warehousing and Collateral Management Limited, Lindsay Corporation India, Shrikar Seeds, and John Deere for supporting us in bringing forward today's program. And we like to say that without you, it wouldn't have been possible. So, to start with our program, ladies and gentlemen, may I first invite Mrs. Sanjeev Chopra for the welcome and theme introduction. And just a few things about him. With over 25 years in the Indian Administrative Services, Shri Chopra was recently the Joint Secretary, Agriculture, Government of India, and the head of the Mission for the Integrated Development of Horticulture. He's been the Principal Secretary, Agriculture, Horticulture, and Food Processing Departments, Government of West Bengal from 2007 to 10, and the Secretary, Industrial Development and Information Technology, Government of Uttarakhand from 2003 to 7. Besides that, he's also held the charge of the Secretary, Rural Development, Horticulture, Cooperation, Food and Civil Supplies for over 18 months in Uttarakhand. So we are very pleased and honored to have you, Mr. Chopra, on our program. Thank you very much for joining us, and if I may now request you to kindly give the welcome and theme introduction. So.
Thank you very much. Secretary Siraj Hussain, who's been a mentor, a friend, and a wonderful leader to work with in the area of agriculture and food processing. Mr. Penn, who is with us today. In fact, he was telling us that this is his 20th or 21st visit to India. He has been the Undersecretary for Agriculture in the US government and now the Chief Economist for John Deere. My distinguished colleague, Mr. P. Tripathi, and my friend, Dr. Mahesh ladies and gentlemen. You know, it's uh, an interesting thought that we are having a leadership program for agriculture, because many of us are aware that we have so many programs on agriculture. We have programs on agricultural production, we have programs on agricultural productivity. Agricultural economists love to hold international conferences. We have conferences on commodity-specific themes, which are dime a dozen. You have a global conference on almost all commodities. What is the need for having a conference on leadership in agriculture? What is the context in which we are looking at leadership in the domain of agriculture and agribusiness? When I use the word agriculture, we're talking about agribusiness because agriculture per se is something which went on well as long as the world was not an integrated market. But as you move towards integrated markets, agriculture transits towards agribusiness, and that is where an entire set of processes, an entire set of things, entire new set of technologies comes into being. And leadership is about understanding complexity. A good leader, of course, when people rise up the ladder, they are called leaders. For instance, everybody on the high table except me is a leader in their own right. I mean, the point is that a leader is a person who understands complexity, because we live in a complex world. We live in a world where things change very rapidly, and where one thing leads to a domino effect elsewhere. You know, China banned smoking in public. It was not like the way we ban smoking in public in India. We can get away with it. But when China banned smoking in public, immediately the tobacco prices fell all over the world, because one decision taken somewhere has a global impact elsewhere. The fact that you have to understand this complexity, different context, is what leadership is about. So leadership in agriculture is also about understanding the complex way the agricultural production in the world is organized. It's about understanding the many different layers in which agriculture activity happens. Because in this world today, we have almost all the stages of agriculture happening somewhere or the other. You have, we have the hunting gathering society, we have some parts of the world where we still at the level of hunting gathering. We have very primitive, let's not use the word primitive, but let's say that we have basic agriculture in some parts of the world. We have some developed agriculture. We have agriculture which is absolutely soilless in some parts of the world. We have hydroponics. We have sea farming. We have a whole set of things which is happening. Leadership is about articulating the interests of many different sections, of many different perspectives in agriculture. And last but not the least, leadership is about building consensus. Because great leaders are those who can build a consensus in difficult times. And let's remember, friends, that we live in difficult times. We have excellencies and economic counselors from several countries in the world here. And all of us represent different interests. All our interests would be at varying levels. And yet getting all these interests in a manner which leads to a non-antagonistic development of the holistic sector is what agricultural leadership can provide. And it's a tough task. It's not something that can happen overnight. This 3-day program of IALP cannot come up with any solutions. But what this 3-day program can do is to set in motion a few questions, a few issues, discussions, and thoughts which over a period of time may evolve into getting a better understanding of how we have to tackle some of the major issues in the world. And amongst the issues in the world that we are grappling today, the most important and the one which is getting the greatest limelight is the global warming issue. Now, agriculture, as we are aware, has contributed to global warming. Agriculture will continue. Now, whether we can continue with agriculture in a manner which contributes further to the global warming, or whether we can have an agricultural strategy by which global warming gets mitigated. These are some of the issues that will concern us, and over the next 2 or 3 days, we will be addressing how can we get into a system where we manage our agriculture in the context of something that we have all signed, whether it is the US, whether it is Philippines, whether it is Kyrgyzstan, whether it is China. We are all party to the Millennium Development Goals. We are all party to the Sustainable Development Goals. And both the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals talk about responsible agriculture. Now, at one level, responsible agriculture is a very easy statement to make. I mean, all of us can say we are responsible. But what is responsibility of agriculture in actual practice? How do we get into a system or into a situation where at one level you tackle food security, because food security is now a very important aspect of the way we look at life. The right to food in India, of course, has become, even earlier we had Article 21, but now the right to food is enshrined. It is enshrined. And the fact is that a country or a sovereign nation today exists. One of the legitimacies of a sovereign state is that it can provide sufficient food, sufficient and culturally appropriate food to its people. And that raises a whole set of questions on how are we going to do it. So are we going to look at food security from the global perspective? Yes, at the level of the globe, we have sufficient food to feed everybody. Yet, does that translate into community level food security? Does that relate itself to issues that are on the ground? That's a big challenge. Whether the challenge or whether the way to handle food security is to provide food, or is it to provide technologies and expertise to ensure that everybody in all parts of the world has the ability to grow food for himself or herself and for the community within a geography that we are talking about. And we are talking about this at a time when the world demand for and the world pattern for food is changing. So no longer are people satisfied at one level. They're not satisfied in eating what they ate 100 years ago. We want diversity. And yet this diversity, if it happens locally, then it is a far better situation to handle than in transporting food across miles and thus adding to the ecological footprints, adding to the carbon footprints that we have. Now, these are some of the issues. I'm just talking about what are the issues that we're going to be discussing for the next 2 or 3 days and why the need for this seminar actually arose and why have we got some of the best CEOs, the best agribusiness leaders, government, academia, journalists, and people, all those who are connected with agriculture to come together on this platform. You see, the way in which we're looking at food is changing. The importance of red meats is going down. Now, when the importance of red meats goes down, this means that the production system is going to change. One of the myths that has been created in our minds always has been that as populations grow, you will need more food. Now, it is not just the amount of food that you need, it's what kind of food you're eating. It's how that food is being accessed, which becomes as important as what is the requirement. And that is a big challenge for us. There is also the challenge of food waste and food loss. If we are going to be wasting about 25 to 30% of our food, and if we are going to be losing about 20% of our food, then the issue is not about production per se. The issue is about value chains. The issue is about transport. The issue is about logistics. The issue is about infrastructure. And that is why the Infrastructure Logistics Federation of India perhaps got into this action, because the realization is that while we have enough production, the issue is how does that production reach the ultimate consumer, and whether we can do it in a manner which is ecologically the best, which is sustainable, and which is much more wholesome than we were used to. Which brings us to another issue, which is about how global research into the areas of agriculture is happening. The fact is that till about 2 decades ago, most of the agricultural research was publicly funded. So whether it was funded by the state land grant universities in the US, whether it was funded by the CGIAR system or the Rockefeller Foundation, the fact is that the first green revolution came about because of publicly funded research. Now that has changed. That has changed, and therefore, because the entire aspect of food is now more related to markets. Now, food is becoming a marketable commodity. It is, and yet it is still a part of the state, because the state must provide this food security. Therefore, states and markets and communities need to work together in a manner which was never there before. Therefore, this dialogue, this discussion between states, markets, farmers and farmers organizations, scientists, logistics suppliers is today more relevant than ever before. Now, I